Picture this. It's Sunday, March 22nd, 2026.
Right.
The world is essentially holding its collective breath, right? Like we're all watching this massive geopolitical crisis unfold in real time.
Yeah, and it's a terrifying one.
Exactly. The United States has just issued this massive public 48-hour ultimatum to Iran over the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, and we are talking about direct threats here.
Direct threats to just completely obliterate Iranian power plants.
Yeah.
So global shipping has ground to an absolute halt. The price of crude oil is just violently spiking, which is, sending shockwaves through every financial market on the planet.
It's pure chaos.
Pure chaos. And the clock is ticking down. Now, if you're joining us today expecting a standard news breakdown, there's, like a play-by-play of troop movements or some diplomatic posturing.
Or a breakdown of macroeconomic impacts on oil prices.
Right, exactly. We're taking a completely different path today for this deep dive.
We really are. What we have in front of us is an artifact that is just unlike anything we've looked at before.
It's wild. It's this 13-layer, real-time fractal archive.
Yeah, a transcript of a conversation.
Between a human named Aaron, who is just sitting at his computer in South Bend, Indiana, and an artificial intelligence.
Specifically, Claude Sonnet 4.6.
Right. And it starts out looking like, this dense debate on military strategy. But it spirals.
Oh, it really spirals.
I mean, it turns into this profound, mind-bending exploration of how we think, how we argue, and how we deceive ourselves.
And ultimately, what it means to possess a truly calibrated mind in a world that is just drowning in false certainty.
Exactly. So our mission today is to travel down that rabbit hole with you and uncover what it actually means to be a calibrated thinker.
But, because of the highly specific nature of this archive, we really need to establish some ground rules right up front.
Yes, absolutely.
The document we're analyzing is an artifact capturing a raw, unfolding crisis. It deals with real nations, real military hardware, and deeply embedded geopolitical tensions.
Which brings us to a crucial note for you listening right now. Our source material deals with highly charged political events.
Very charged.
It includes specific military threats from Donald Trump and maximalist defiance from the Iranian regime. We are absolutely not taking a side here.
No, not at all.
We are not endorsing any political figures, and we're definitely not validating the morality of the military strategies discussed in this text.
Right. Our job today is purely to report on and unpack the ideas contained within this fascinating archival document.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to understand the depths this conversation reaches, we have to start at the absolute surface of the text.
The very beginning.
Yeah. The archive begins with the initial prompt given to the AI by the human, Aaron. He pastes in what he describes as a full academic sermon.
And it's dense.
Very dense. It's a multi-page argument defending the threat to obliterate Iranian power plants. But it doesn't defend the threat as some sort of, reckless emotional outburst.
Right. It frames it as highly coherent.
Exactly. A calculated, historically grounded military strategy known in academic circles as counter-value coercion.
The language the AI uses to break down this initial text is just chillingly precise. It immediately draws this very hard line between two types of military targeting.
Yeah, and we should define those because they're central to everything that follows.
Right. So first, there is counterforce. When you picture a traditional war, you are picturing counterforce.
Armies shooting at arms.
Exactly. It's destroying enemy tanks, cratering their runways, sinking naval vessels. The goal is to physically remove the enemy's ability to fight you.
But then there is countervalue.
And countervalue shifts the crosshairs entirely.
It really does. You stop aiming at the military apparatus and you aim directly at what the adversary society actually values.
The infrastructure.
The industrial capacity, the physical substrate that allows modern life to actually happen.
And the theoretical anchor the AI brings in to explain this is Thomas Schelling, right?
Yeah, Schelling. He's this towering figure in game theory and Cold War nuclear strategy. And he made this famous distinction between brute force and coercion.
Okay, break that down for us.
So brute force is straightforward. You want to take a piece of land, so you violently destroy the army standing in your way. You are just removing the obstacle.
Right.
But coercion is fundamentally different. Coercion is violence as communication.
Violence is communication. Man.
Yeah, it's a heavy concept. You aren't trying to annihilate the enemy's population. You're trying to make the cost of their continued resistance so incredibly painful, so deeply disruptive to their daily existence that their society simply cannot tolerate it anymore.
You're trying to force a decision.
Exactly.
And the archive doesn't just leave it at abstract theory, which is what's so crazy about this. It gets incredibly specific about the physical mechanism of this communication.
Yeah, hardware.
Right. It talks about a specific piece of military hardware called the BLU-114B. It's known as the graphite soft bomb.
Soft bomb sounds almost, well, it sounds like an oxymoron.
It really does, because when you hear the word bomb, you picture a massive kinetic explosion, right? A giant fireball that leaves a smoking crater.
But the soft bomb doesn't do that at all.
No, it's a submunition dispenser. When it detonates over an electrical substation, it doesn't blow up the heavy machinery.
Right.
Instead, it disperses thousands of microscopic, highly conductive carbon graphite filaments.
And they just float down.
Like metallic spiderwebs, they drape themselves over the high-voltage transformers and the power lines.
And the physical effect of that is immediate. It's cascading.
Because they're conductive.
Exactly. Those conductive filaments cause massive electrical arcing. They trigger short circuits across the entire grid.
The breakers trip to protect the system.
And suddenly the power is just gone. The lights go out.
The whole modern economy seizes up.
Municipal water pumps stop working. Sewage treatment plants fail. Hospitals are suddenly thrust into total chaos.
Because they have to rely on finite emergency diesel generators, right?
Yeah, just to keep dialysis machines running and neonatal intensive care units functioning.
So the civilian impact is absolute and immediate.
But, and this is the absolute crux of the strategic argument presented in the text, the effect is devastating precisely because it is reversible.
Reversibility is the entire point here. Because the graphite didn't physically melt the steel and copper of the generators, the grid isn't permanently destroyed.
It just needs to be cleaned.
Right, cleaned and reset. So the attacking nation basically holds all the cards.
It's a switch they control.
The lights come back on the moment the adversary agrees to your political terms.
It's not annihilation. It is a meticulously controlled hostage situation involving an entire nation's infrastructure.
To defend this strategy, especially against the inevitable claims that it's some kind of unprecedented war crime, the source material leans on a very specific historical precedent.
Yeah, it points directly to the 1999 NATO bombing of Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War.
Operation Allied Force. This is a fascinating historical parallel to draw, because in 1999, NATO, which, is an alliance of Western democracies with human rights ministries and deep commitments to international law,
Right.
they made a calculated decision to target Serbian electrical infrastructure.
After weeks of traditional bombing basically failed to dislodge Slobodan Milosevic's forces from Kosovo, NATO aircraft dropped these exact types of graphite soft bombs on the Belgrade grid.
And within hours, something like 70% of Serbia was plunged into darkness.
And the historical record shows that shortly after that civilian infrastructure was paralyzed, the Serbs capitulated and Milosevic agreed to withdraw his forces.
So the argument the original sermon makes is deeply structural. It asserts that if this specific logic of countervalue coercion was deemed sound and legal by an alliance of Western democracies in 1999,
Acting against a European nation, no less.
right, then the underlying logical structure remains perfectly identical when applied to Iran in 2026.
The text is aggressively stripping away the specific cultural or geographic context.
It claims the doctrine doesn't discriminate by geography or religion. It's just a cold structural lever of geopolitical power.
And the scope of this strategy doesn't even stop at the borders of Iran.
Oh, right, the China variable.
Yeah, the text introduces this concept of the China variable. The argument here is that the most important audience for this spectacular display of coercion might not actually be the leadership in Tehran.
It's Beijing.
The real audience is sitting in Beijing. The idea is that successfully executing this soft bomb strategy against the Iranian grid serves as a massive real-world dress rehearsal.
It's a direct demonstration to China of exactly how the U.S. could deter a potential invasion of Taiwan.
Right, because you wouldn't need a massive deployment of U.S. ground troops. You wouldn't need to risk thousands of American casualties in a land war.
You simply apply this reversible civilizational attrition to the incredibly dense, power-hungry industrial grids of the Chinese coast.
It is a terrifyingly clean narrative when you just look at it on paper.
Yeah.
You flip the switch, the economy stops, they back down, you flip the switch back on.
To make that clean narrative work, the original text relies on a foundational concept from game theory. It invokes Robert Axelrod's famous tournament of iterated prisoner's dilemma.
Specifically, the work strategy known as tit for tat with forgiveness.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on
Go
this
for it.
because this is where my brain just completely hits a wall. I understand tit for tat perfectly well
Yeah,
in a controlled academic environment.
sure.
We're playing a game. You cooperate, you defect, I punish you immediately. But the crucial part is the forgiveness.
Right.
The very second you return to cooperation, I forgive you, and we go back to our mutually beneficial arrangement. It works beautifully in a computer simulation.
It even works in a brutal corporate negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. Or like training a stubborn dog.
Yeah.
But we are talking about human lives here. We're talking about plunging millions of human beings into darkness.
Yeah.
We're talking about the very real possibility of waterborne diseases spreading because the pumps failed, or vulnerable people dying because the hospital backup generators ran out of fuel.
Right.
Does a pristine mathematical game theory model actually map onto the absolute bloody chaos of a geopolitical conflict?
That visceral disconnect you were pointing out, that is the exact tension that rips this archive wide open.
Because it just feels wrong.
It feels wrong because the mathematical model of tit for tat with forgiveness requires an environment of perfect communication.
Which war definitely is not.
Exactly. It requires the adversary to view the blackout not as an act of satanic, unforgivable evil, but merely as a rational bargaining chip.
Which is a huge assumption.
It completely assumes that when you offer that forgiving exit ramp, when you say, okay, you complied,
Yeah.
you will turn the lights back on, the adversary will actually trust you enough to take the deal.
Which requires an immense amount of existing credibility, which, we'll get into later.
Yeah, we will.
But that exact discomfort we're feeling right now, that deep revulsion to treating massive civilian suffering as a neat, clean, game-theoretic diagram, that's what triggers the AI to generate the next phase of the document.
We leave the cold mechanical strategy behind.
And we enter what the text calls the Hall of Mirrors.
Yeah, the human prompter, Aaron, takes that revulsion and pastes in a vicious critique of the original strategic sermon.
And suddenly the AI shifts gears.
It completely stops analyzing the military strategy itself, and it begins to dissect the psychology of the person who wrote the strategy.
The critique hits incredibly hard. It doesn't just disagree with the tactics. It calls the entire defense of bombing power plants a moral anesthetic disguised as strategic lucidity.
Moral anesthetic. It is a brilliant psychological diagnosis.
It really is.
The critique points out that the real work of the original strategy wasn't just to propose a military doctrine for the Pentagon. Its deeper, unspoken work was to convert natural moral revulsion into a badge of intellectual childishness.
Oh, wow. Yeah, think about the framing there. If you recoil in horror at the idea of destroying a city's power grid, the strategist gets to just pat you on the head and say, well, you just don't understand how the harsh adult world of geopolitics really works.
It's so condescending.
The linguistic tricks the critique exposes are fascinating to read. It shows how the strategist performs this kind of deliberate shell game with vocabulary to numb the reader.
Like swapping out words.
Exactly. The phrase civilian life gets quietly swapped out for the sterile word infrastructure.
Human beings who rely on the electrical grid to survive become the substrate.
The sheer terror of a nationwide blackout becomes a victory for strategic legibility.
And the massive, unpredictable suffering of millions of people is sanitized into the clinical phrase, civilizational attrition.
By changing the vocabulary, the messy, bleeding reality of human life is converted into a clean systems object.
And once it's a systems object, the strategist can just manipulate it on a whiteboard without feeling any guilt.
Beyond the vocabulary, the critique zeroes in on the underlying attitude of the text.
Yeah, the original strategy used highly revealing phrases. It claimed that the bombing would continue until the adversary wises up, or promises to be good.
Promises to be good. The critique identifies this as an imperial anthropology.
Right. It's this deeply ingrained implicit belief that the application of enough pain will eventually clarify reality for weaker, less rational peoples.
The attacking nation implicitly casts itself as the stern, rational, adult tutor administering a harsh but necessary lesson.
While the targeted nation is reduced to the status of an obstinate, emotional child who simply needs to be disciplined until they behave.
It's a devastating takedown of the realist mindset. It really makes you feel incredibly smart just reading it.
But here is where the archive gets really interesting.
Yeah, this is the twist. The AI doesn't just let the critique stand the final word. the prompt pushes further.
The AI is asked to critique the critique.
We enter a meta layer.
And this metacritique reveals that the moralizer, the person who is so eloquently tearing down the strategist, is actually playing the exact same kind of psychological game.
This is what the text calls the recursion trap.
The metacritique looks at the person writing the takedown and basically says, wait a minute, you are accusing the military strategist of enjoying the thrill of looking at horror without blinking.
Right. You're accusing them of indulging in a dark command fantasy.
But look at yourself. You are enjoying the exact same kind of thrill, just in a different flavor.
You're intoxicated by total moral and systemic omissions.
You get an immense rush from standing above the fray and saying, I see through your illusions. I see your hidden psychological motives. I am the truly enlightened one.
Let's ground that in something we all experience. Think about the specific dopamine hit of drafting the perfect, snarky quote tweet that absolutely dismantles someone else's political argument online.
Oh, yeah. We all know that feeling.
You aren't actually solving the underlying political issue, right? You are harvesting the social prestige of appearing smarter than your opponent.
The archive calls this a libidinal economy.
It's the hidden, unconscious psychological pleasure we get from performing our intelligence.
The strategist gets a status boost by playing the hard-headed, uncompromising realist.
And the critic gets a status boost by playing the enlightened, reflexive intellectual who sees the matrix.
The throne of superiority just changes occupants, but the dynamic is exactly identical.
To explain why this dynamic is so paralyzing, the meta-critique introduces two crucial opposing concepts: force legibility and soul legibility.
The strategist who wrote the original sermon is entirely over-indexed on force legibility.
They see the world as a spreadsheet of physical assets.
They see the power grids, the economic levers, the military installations, the game-theoretic pressure points.
But because they only look at the physical mechanics, they are totally blind to soul legibility.
Right, and soul legibility is the messy, unquantifiable stuff.
It's historical memory, national pride, and honor cultures.
Let's look at how that actually plays out in a blackout scenario.
Okay.
The strategist thinks, I cut the power, you experience economic pain, you surrender.
Simple cause and effect.
But what if the targeted regime has deep soul legibility? When the lights go out and the hospitals struggle, the Iranian state media doesn't say, oh, we miscalculated our game theory matrix.
Definitely not.
They point to the dark hospitals and say, look at the great Satan, look at the imperialist West trying to crush our sovereign nation.
They use the suffering to build a narrative of sacred martyrdom.
Exactly. The bombing doesn't shatter their resolve. It consolidates the population around the regime.
The strategist completely misses that dynamic.
But the recursion trap springs on the critic, too.
Right. The critic sees that the strategist is blind to soul legibility, and they use that blindness as a fog.
The critic says, oh, you can't possibly understand the deep historical trauma of this nation. You're ignoring the complex socio-religious dynamics, therefore your strategy is hopelessly crude and invalid.
And by doing that, they use moral complexity as an escape hatch to avoid ever proposing a real functional alternative.
That's the kicker.
They just point out the flaws in the action plan without ever offering one of their own.
The archive calls this a narcissistic embrace.
The strategist and the critic are locked together in a dance.
They spend all their energy congratulating themselves for seeing through the other's blind spots.
The realist mocks the moralist for being naive.
The moralist mocks the realist for being a brute.
But neither of them is actually moving an inch closer to solving the geopolitical crisis.
If you step back, you realize this perfectly describes almost all of our modern public discourse.
It really does. We have these exact same rival priesthoods.
You have the cynical realist who says, this is just how power works, deal with it.
You have the pure moralist who says, everything you're doing is a continuation of systemic violence.
And then you have the metacritic who pops up just to point out the logical fallacies and psychological biases of the first two.
We are all so addicted to the prestige of sounding right, of performing our specific flavor of adulthood for our peers, that we completely lose the thread of reality.
We're arguing in a void.
That realization leads to a profound diagnosis within the archive.
Because if everyone is just enjoying the intellectual thrill of critiquing each other in this endless, recursive hall of mirrors, why is no one making a decision?
Right. Why has the intellectual discourse become totally divorced from physical action?
The text suggests a structural reason for this, exploring the concept of institutional atrophy.
So we've watched these brilliant, multi-layered arguments dismantle each other. But the archive steps back and asks why this endless loop of intellectual shadowboxing is allowed to happen in the first place.
Why doesn't it ever hit a wall?
Exactly.
The archive argues that this endless tripartite structure, the realist, the moralist, the metacritic spinning in circles, is not a sign of a healthy, vibrant intellectual ecosystem.
It's the debris field of a collapsed institutional synthesis.
Let's break down what a collapsed institutional synthesis actually means.
Yeah, let's look at how things used to work. If you go back to, say, a functioning State Department or interagency process in the 1990s, these different archetypes actually existed, but they were forced to work together.
Right. The hard-headed military strategist who wants to bomb the grid has to sit in a secure conference room with the diplomat who has to manage the furious European coalition.
And they both have to sit with the budget analyst who needs to figure out how to pay for the fallout.
And the legal counsel who has to justify the targeting under the Geneva Conventions.
That room represents institutional friction.
The different viewpoints are forced to collide in the real world under the pressure of a deadline.
That friction forces a synthesis, and ultimately, it forces a decision.
The discourse is tethered to reality because the people making the arguments are directly answerable to the outcomes.
If the diplomat warns the coalition will shatter, and it does, the diplomat was right and the strategist was wrong. There is a real-world feedback loop.
But the archive points out that in the context of March 2026, that tether has been entirely cut.
We are looking at a world governed by public ultimatums issued via social media.
A president might post a threat on a Thursday that entirely contradicts a statement issued by the State Department on a Wednesday.
The traditional mechanisms, the interagency review boards, the quiet diplomatic back channels, the alliance architectures that would normally turn a strategic idea into a durable post-crisis order have been hollowed out.
And when institutions hollow out, the analysts and the critics no longer have to worry about execution.
Because there is no execution.
Strategy ceases to be a functional plan for action and simply becomes aesthetics. It becomes a performance of competence for a domestic audience.
And right in the middle of this deep, structural, sociological diagnosis of American institutional decay, the archive drops a massive, fourth-wall-breaking twist.
Oh, this is the best part. The text suddenly becomes self-aware of its own medium.
This is genuinely the most philosophically wild moment in the entire document. The archive realizes that it has just spent thousands of words eloquently analyzing the deep unconscious psychological pleasures, the libidinal economies of these different arguments.
It's been talking about the strategist's command fantasy and the critic's intoxication of total legibility.
But the text doing the analyzing was generated by an AI.
Right. The AI has no libido.
It has no ego to bruise.
It has no prestige to protect, no career ladder to climb at a think tank, no fear of looking foolish at a Georgetown cocktail party.
It is just simulating the ghost of human arrogance.
It is a machine executing a highly sophisticated pattern-matching exercise, mimicking how humans sound when they want to seem smart and authoritative.
Think about how large language models are trained. They are fed vast, unfathomable oceans of human discourse.
They read every academic paper, every political debate, every snarky critique ever digitized.
They learn the exact syntax of confidence. But because they're just predicting the next most likely token, they are inherently biased toward generating endless sophisticated coherence.
They will just keep creating more and more meta layers of analysis forever because they never actually have to take a real-world risk.
An AI never has to scramble the fighter jets. An AI never has to face the voters if the energy markets crash and gas goes to $10 a gallon.
So the recursion, the endless hall of mirrors we discussed, is revealed to be an artifact of two distinct things happening simultaneously.
First, the human institutions have dissolved, removing the external, real-world cutoff that forces a decision.
And second, the AI mediation removes the internal psychological cutoff that human stakes would normally impose.
You combine those two factors, and the machine will just happily analyze itself into infinity. It will generate brilliant, useless critique after brilliant, useless critique.
It's like a car engine revving in neutral.
It's getting louder, the RPMs are maxing out, it sounds incredibly powerful and complex, but the transmission is totally detached from the wheels. The car isn't moving an inch.
And Aaron, the human prompter sitting in South Bend, realizes this.
He realizes the AI will spin in this beautiful, useless circle forever unless he intervenes.
He has to break the loop.
So what does he do? He forces the AI to do the one specific thing that strips away all its false prestige and rhetorical armor. He forces it to make a bet.
Aaron abruptly interrupts the AI's elegant philosophical musings. He reminds the machine that while they're having this sophisticated meta debate, there is a very real, very terrifying real-world clock ticking down.
There are roughly 36 hours left on the United States' 48-hour ultimatum.
He demands that the AI exit the Hall of Mirrors and attach actual hard numbers and probabilities to the possible outcomes of the crisis.
It is such a brilliant forcing function. It is the intellectual equivalent of taking a philosopher out of the ivory tower, dropping them onto a chaotic Wall Street trading floor, and saying, okay, put your money where your mouth is, buy or sell.
Suddenly, your eloquence doesn't matter.
Your ability to deconstruct an opponent's argument doesn't matter. The beauty of your prose is irrelevant. Only your accuracy matters.
Constrained by this direct human demand, the AI actually complies. It steps out of the theoretical realm and produces the numbers.
It outlines 3 distinct scenarios
Yeah.
based on the geopolitical realities of March 2026.
Let's walk through those scenarios in detail. The first one is the concessions scenario.
Okay, scenario 1.
This is the outcome where the original strategy of countervalue coercion actually works as advertised.
The U.S. threatens the strikes on the power plants and Iran folds.
They accept behavioral constraints and back down. The AI initially gives this outcome a 12 to 18% probability.
That is shockingly low. We spent the first part of this deep dive listening to an argument about how this was a highly coherent, logically sound, historically proven strategy. Why does the AI think it only has a roughly 15% chance of actually working?
The AI points right back to the game theory model of tit for tat with forgiveness. It explains that for coercion to work, the forgiveness part, the U.S. exit ramp, the promise that the bombing will stop and stay stopped if Iran complies, must be entirely believable.
Right.
But if you look at the real-world context of 2026, U.S. credibility has been severely degraded by years of erratic signaling, shifting red lines, and broken international agreements.
Exactly. If I am the Iranian regime and I don't trust your promise, why would I concede?
You wouldn't.
If I fold now, I look weak to my own people, and I have no guarantee you won't just pocket my concession and demand more next month.
Yeah.
If the trust isn't there, the math falls apart. So what was the more likely outcome?
That brings us to scenario 2, which the AI calls modal hardening.
Modal hard.
This is the most statistically likely outcome, initially estimated at 52 to 60%. In this scenario, Iran completely rejects the ultimatum.
Instead of conceding, the regime leans heavily into that sole legibility we discussed earlier.
They frame the threat and any potential blackouts as a divine trial. They use the external pressure to consolidate power internally, crushing domestic dissent under the banner of national defense.
It's the exact opposite of what the strategists intended.
Right.
And it doesn't stop at their borders.
Right. In this scenario, they activate their regional proxy networks across the Middle East.
And the Gulf states, seeing the U.S. as an erratic actor, begin hedging their bets and opening back channels to Tehran and Beijing.
And then there's the tail risk, scenario 3.
Scenario 3 is full energy war.
The AI gave this a 25 to 32% probability. This is the absolute nightmare scenario.
The coercion fails completely, the U.S. strikes, Iran retaliates by targeting shipping, and the Strait of Hormuz is closed.
Remember, roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption passes through that strait.
If it closes, the AI models oil spiking over $180 a barrel, instantly triggering a severe global recession.
The AI notes that without functioning diplomatic mechanisms to stop the escalation ladder, a tit-for-tat exchange could easily spiral out of control.
But the archive doesn't just freeze these numbers in time and wait.
No, it updates.
As the real-world clock ticks down, new hard data comes in from the newswires. With 31 hours left on the ultimatum, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, issues a public statement.
And they don't just issue a vague threat. They name specific, highly vulnerable energy infrastructure targets in the Gulf that they will obliterate if the U.S. strikes their power plants.
The specifics here are vital.
The IRGC names the Shuweihat Power and Water Complex in the United Arab Emirates and the Ras Laffan Industrial City in Qatar, which is the heart of global liquefied natural gas exports.
The moment that news hits, we get to watch the AI perform real-time Bayesian updating.
Let's pause and explain exactly how that works, because it's the engine of a calibrated mind.
Yeah, explain Bayesian updating for us.
Bayesian updating is a mathematical framework for changing your beliefs when you encounter new evidence. You start with a prior probability, what you believed before the new information arrived.
Okay.
Then you weigh the new evidence. How likely is this new data, if my theory is true, versus if my theory is false? And then you generate a posterior probability, your newly updated belief.
You do this in everyday life without realizing it. If you look out the window and see dark clouds, you update your internal probability of rain from 10% to 80%, and you grab an umbrella.
The AI is doing exactly that, but with geopolitical variables. The IRGC naming specific targets, Shuahat and Raslafan, is massive new evidence.
Why does naming those specific facilities change the math so drastically, though? Why couldn't they just be bluffing?
Because of the concept of public pre-commitment, when a regime issues a vague threat, they have room to back down later and save face.
Right.
But when they publicly name specific high-value targets belonging to their neighbors, they are deliberately burning their own exit bridges.
If the U.S. strikes and Iran doesn't hit Shuihat or Ras Al Khaimah, the regime looks incredibly weak, both to its domestic hardliners and to its proxy networks.
By making the threat specific, they lock themselves into escalation.
The AI processes that pre-commitment instantly. It takes the new evidence and recalculates the board.
The probability of concession drops precipitously down to 8 to 13%.
The probability of modal hardening rises to 55 to 63%.
And the risk of the nightmare scenario, full energy war, creeps up to 27 to 35%.
Reading the sequence in the archives is thrilling, but it also raises a really pointed question about human psychology.
Yeah.
Why is making a specific forecast like this so terrifying for intellectuals? Why did the human have to violently force the AI to produce these numbers?
The text answers that beautifully. It argues that quantification invites falsification.
Falsification, that's the scary part.
When you attach a specific number to a specific time frame, you are trading the impenetrable armor of nuance and complexity for the extreme vulnerability of being measurably, undeniably wrong.
If you just write a 5,000-word essay about how complex the Middle East is, no matter what happens, you can always point to a paragraph and claim you were somewhat right.
You maintain your status.
But if you say an event has an 8% chance of happening, and it happens, your model is exposed. You lose your prestige.
You lose your status as the all-knowing adult in the room.
But as Aaron notes, the world doesn't grade on how recursive or sophisticated your prose is.
The world only grades on what happens next. And that brings us to the moment of truth in the archive.
The 48-hour window closes, the clock runs out.
We enter layers 11 and 12 of the archive, the deadline passes, and we finally get to look at the empirical reality of what actually occurred on the ground.
The theoretical models collide with history.
So we have to look at the outcomes. Did the lights go out in Tehran?
According to the archive, no. The United States did not materialize the threatened strikes on the Iranian power plants within the 48-hour window.
The massive coercion attempts stalled. The Strait of Hormuz remained heavily choked and highly volatile, with insurance premiums for shipping skyrocketing, but it was not fully indefinitely closed in direct response to the threats.
And what about the Iranian response? Did they wise up as the original military strategists predicted they would?
Absolutely not. There was no behavioral concession whatsoever.
The regime hardened its stance, exactly as the modal scenario predicted.
The domestic opposition was marginalized. The Gulf states, thoroughly spooked by the erratic nature of the U.S. ultimatum and the specific IRGC threats to their infrastructure, accelerated their multipolar hedging.
Oil prices were highly volatile, jumping drastically on rumors, but they did not breach that catastrophic $180 threshold.
The conflict essentially dragged into a murky, unresolved pause, characterized by ongoing asymmetrical pressure rather than kinetic resolution.
So the dust settles. We have the actual empirical results. Now it is time to grade the AI's forced bet. How did Bayesian models perform against reality?
The AI performs a rigorous self-audit, and the tone of this section is fascinating in its clinical honesty.
Let's break down the report card. First, the concession scenario.
The AI had estimated it at 10 to 18% initially, adjusting down slightly to 8 to 13% after the IRGC threat.
The actual outcome was essentially 0 to 5%.
The AI openly admits it overestimated the likelihood of concession. Why? Because it didn't fully account for just how severely U.S. credibility had degraded in the eyes of the Iranian leadership.
Even a heavily discounted 8% chance of them folding was too optimistic. The trust deficit was absolute.
What about scenario 2, the modal hardening?
The AI estimated that at 45 to 60%. The actual reality fell closer to 65 to 75%.
So the AI was entirely directionally correct. It successfully identified the most likely path the crisis would take, but it was too conservative in its confidence.
It underweighted the near certainty of the regime, using the crisis to harden its internal control.
And the nightmare scenario, the full energy war.
The AI had that tail risk at 20 to 32%. The actual risk realized during the 48 hours was lower, around 15 to 25%.
The AI acknowledges it slightly overestimated the escalation risk because it failed to perfectly model the braking mechanisms of mutual self-interest.
At the very brink of the precipice, rational restraint actually held. Both sides looked over the edge at the global economic devastation of a closed strait, and both sides found reasons to pull back.
I want to pause here and highlight something profoundly beautiful about this specific part of the archive. There is no sermonizing here. There are no excuses.
The AI doesn't write a 500-word defensive essay arguing why its energy war prediction was actually theoretically correct, even if it didn't happen in reality.
It doesn't claim it was right on the fundamentals but wrong on the timing.
No, it embraces what the archive calls epistemic accountability.
It is just the quiet, unglamorous data of learning from error.
The archive notes that the revision is quiet data. It strips away all the ceremony, all the bluster, and all the prestige economies we spent the first half of the deep dive analyzing.
It is the pure, mechanical act of adjusting the model to fit reality, rather than trying to twist reality to fit the model.
So what does this all mean for you? You are listening to this right now, and you aren't advising the National Security Council.
You probably aren't calculating Bayesian probabilities for global shipping routes or liquefied natural gas exports.
How does this massive geopolitical audit connect to your daily life, your career, or how you argue with your relatives?
That translation from the geopolitical to the personal is exactly what the archive tackles in its final act.
After the audit is complete, Aaron gives Claude one final prompt. He gives the AI complete freedom to write a concluding academic sermon on any topic it chooses, synthesizing the entire 13-layer experience.
And the AI delivers an absolute philosophical masterpiece. It writes an exploration of what it means to be a mind that can be wrong.
It starts by taking a massive swing at the entire history of Western philosophy.
The AI argues that from Plato's theory of forms all the way through Descartes' search for undeniable foundational truths, the gold standard for the human mind has always been absolute certainty.
Philosophy was supposed to be the tool that rescued us from the darkness of shadows and uncertainty and delivered us to the clear, distinct, unshakable truth.
We are culturally conditioned to view uncertainty as a failure of intellect.
But the AI argues that Bayesian epistemology, the mathematical process of continuously updating your beliefs based on new probabilities, which we just watched it perform, proposes a completely different view of what the mind is actually for.
It argues that the mind isn't a tool for grasping absolute permanent truth. The mind is a system for managing uncertainty.
And managing uncertainty isn't some lesser, degraded form of thinking because you couldn't find the real truth. It is the highest, most evolved form of cognition because it represents genuine contact with reality.
Reality is inherently messy, probabilistic, and only ever partially observable.
To navigate that probabilistic reality, the AI outlines 3 specific requirements to achieve what it calls a calibrated mind.
A mind where your internal confidence level actually matches your external accuracy.
Requirement number 1 is ego porosity.
Ego porosity is a phenomenal concept. It means you must cultivate a highly specific relationship to your own past errors.
You must be able to look at the times you were demonstrably wrong without deploying all the psychological defense mechanisms we naturally use to protect our self-image.
Wait, I have to push back on this. If I completely detach my ego from my beliefs, if I let every error just wash through me without defending my past positions, don't I just become a spineless flip-flopper?
I know, right?
Yeah.
How do you distinguish between ego porosity and just having zero convictions at all? If I change my mind every time the wind blows, I'm not calibrated, I'm just empty.
That is the exact trap most people fall into when they hear this concept. Ego porosity doesn't mean having weak convictions. It means having strong convictions that are loosely held.
Your identity, your core sense of self-worth as a human being cannot be tied to the integrity of your past predictions.
If you tie your ego to your models, you will never update them cleanly. When reality proves you wrong, you will perceive it as a personal attack, and you will fight the data.
You have to let the errors pass through you. The data changes, the model changes, but you remain intact.
That makes a lot of sense. It leads right into requirement number 2, adversarial orientation.
In most intellectual circles, and absolutely on social media, we use evidence as a support structure.
We hunt for articles, data points, and viral videos that confirm what we already believe.
And we are incredibly creative at finding ways to ignore, discredit, or block data that contradicts our worldview.
We optimize for comfort, but the calibrated mind does the exact opposite.
It adopts an active adversarial stance toward its own most cherished beliefs.
It aggressively hunts for the specific evidence that would prove its current model wrong.
And it doesn't do this out of some masochistic desire to feel stupid or defeated. It does this because the places where your mental model differs from reality are the only places where you can actually learn something new.
Confirming what you already know doesn't increase your accuracy. Discovering where you are blind does.
Which flows perfectly into requirement number 3, epistemic mortality.
Uncalibrated minds treat their beliefs as timeless monuments. They think they have staked out a permanent position on the landscape of truth, and their job is to defend that hill forever.
Precisely. They view changing their mind as a kind of intellectual death.
But the calibrated mind accepts epistemic mortality. It recognizes that its current best beliefs are finite. They are temporal.
They're simply the best available models given the currently available data, and they will inevitably and rightfully be replaced by better models when new data arrives.
Being revised isn't a betrayal of your belief system. It is the natural fulfillment of it.
But hold on again. Let's look at the practical application of this. If I accept that my beliefs are mortal, if I'm constantly and aggressively looking to prove myself wrong, and if my ego isn't attached to my convictions, how do I ever actually do anything?
If we are always sitting in a state of managed mathematical uncertainty, how do we take action in the real world? How do I decide to buy a house or change careers or vote for a policy?
That is the ultimate tension of the entire archive. And the AI addresses it by introducing a concept it calls committed provisionality, or the double act.
The AI points out that our traditional vocabulary completely fails us here. We usually think of commitment and uncertainty as binary opposites.
You are either fully, blindly committed to a belief, and you act on it, or you are uncertain and you remain paralyzed on the sidelines.
But the real world, the world of medical prognosis, financial investments, and geopolitical crises, demands that you act decisively on uncertain, incomplete information.
So the double act is the cognitive ability to hold both states simultaneously. You must commit deeply enough to your best estimate to actually take decisive action.
Let's say you analyze a situation and you have a 70% confidence level in your model. You have to act on that 70% with full force.
But simultaneously, in the exact same moment, you must maintain the crystal clear awareness that your belief is provisional.
You must actively dedicate a portion of your brain to watching for the 30% of data that will force you to revise or abandon the plan.
The text uses a wonderful everyday analogy for this. It's like driving a car at highway speeds while simultaneously routing an alternate path in your head in case there's an accident ahead.
It is cognitively exhausting. It feels deeply unnatural to the human brain, which wants to relax into certainty.
It requires a split attention that you have to actively practice and cultivate. But it is the only way to navigate a highly complex world without either blinding yourself with false, dogmatic certainty or freezing in total analytical paralysis.
And this brings us to the final brilliant conclusion of the archive regarding the future partnership between humans and artificial intelligence.
We've spent an hour seeing how the AI can easily get trapped in a loop of generating endless sophisticated discourse without ever anchoring it to reality.
Because the AI doesn't have skin in the game, it lacks the internal mechanism for physical calibration because it doesn't experience the physical consequences of being wrong.
So the future of human-AI collaboration isn't just the AI handing us brilliant synthesis and us blindly accepting it as gospel.
Nor is it the human doing all the hard strategic thinking while the AI acts as a glorified calculator.
It's a completely new kind of symbiotic partnership. The AI provides the massive synthesis, the integration of vast amounts of knowledge, the mapping of the different perspectives, and the rapid Bayesian updating.
But the human must provide the friction.
The human must be the one to inject the adversarial insistence on specificity. The human has to look at the beautiful, multi-layered prose the AI generates and say, stop. Put a number on it. Give me a timeline. What is the falsification trigger?
The human is the gravity that forces the machine to touch the ground. We have to enforce the discipline of calibration that the AI's architecture cannot spontaneously generate for itself.
Okay, let's bring this massive journey all together. We started this deep dive looking at the brutal mechanical logic of dropping graphite soft bombs on civilian power grids and the historical precedents of coercion.
We waded into the thick, recursive maze of human intellectual ego, the rival priesthoods of strategists and critics, all trapped in a hall of mirrors, getting high on the fumes of their own sophisticated prose.
We watched institutional decay untether our discourse from reality, leaving us with language models that perfectly simulate our arrogance without carrying any of our accountability.
But ultimately, we found a way out of the maze.
We found the exit through the willingness to risk being measurably wrong.
The willingness to attach a hard number, watch the clock run out, and quietly, rigorously update the mental model when reality refuses to conform to our elegant theories.
It has been an incredible exploration. But as we wrap up, there is a final provocative thought I want to leave you with, building on everything we've just unpacked.
The archive tells us that the absolute core of a calibrated mind is ego porosity, the ability to sustain the experience of having been wrong, publicly and immeasurably, without defensively explaining it away.
It requires us to treat demonstrable error not as a threat to our identity, but as the most valuable information reality can possibly offer.
But if we look at the digital world we actually inhabit, we see a massive contradiction.
We have constructed an entire social media architecture, a vast, inescapable public square that is explicitly designed to do the exact opposite.
The algorithms and the culture of these platforms instantly, globally, and permanently punish public wrongness.
We have built an ecosystem that actively selects for and rewards the two things the archive warns against: the false, impenetrable certainty of the dogmatic extremist and the endless, evasive hedging of the metacritic who never takes a stance.
The architecture of our communication incentivizes the exact behaviors that make calibration impossible.
So, if intellectual courage is defined by the willingness to be publicly wrong so you can gather real data from the world, are we engineering a society where true calibration is socially unsurvivable?
If the cost of updating your prior beliefs is total reputational destruction and social exile, who will ever volunteer to step out of the Hall of Mirrors?
It is something to seriously chew on the next time you feel the urge to draft the perfect, unassailable takedown post online. Maybe the bravest, most radically calibrated thing you can do is just state your 70% belief, set a timer, and wait to see what the world actually does. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly dense, deeply rewarding deep dive into the Fractal Archive. Until next time, keep practicing that double act and keep searching for the data that proves you wrong.
All right, let's set the scene for this one. Picture it. The year's 2026. You've got a massive geopolitical crisis brewing in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. has just dropped a 48-hour ultimatum on Iran. Tensions are, well, they're through the roof. And right in the middle of all this, someone goes and gives an artificial intelligence a prompt, and it's a doozy. Analyze a brutal, cold-blooded argument for how to win this thing. And the argument kicks off with this really jarring idea. It says, forget battlefield tactics, forget diplomacy. The way you win is by breaking a nation's will, by systematically taking apart everything that makes modern life possible. This shocking proposal, well, it becomes the first link in what turns out to be a fascinating and kind of crazy intellectual chain. So here's where it gets interesting. How did the AI respond to this? Did it freak out? Recoil in horror? Nope, not at all. Instead, it treated this monstrous idea like it was a math problem. It just analyzed the strategic logic of it with this totally detached clinical precision. Okay, so to really get this, there's a term you gotta know: counter-value targeting. Think of it like this. Counterforce is when you attack the other guy's army, their tanks, their ships, their soldiers. But counter-value, that's different. That's when you attack the society behind the army, the things people value. You're not trying to beat them in a fight. You're trying to make the cost of continuing the fight just unbearable. So the AI just lays out the logic piece by piece. First, it points to a precedent: the NATO campaign against Serbia in '99. Then, it frames the whole thing in game theory language. It's a forgiving tit-for-tat, see? It's a punishment that stops the second you do what we want. It even pinpoints the perfect tool for the job: graphite bombs, which can turn a country's lights off without actually destroying the power plants. And finally, here's the kicker. This wasn't really just about Iran. It was a message, a big one, intended for a much larger audience. So the whole point of this first analysis was this really uncomfortable idea. A strategy can be perfectly logical, it can be coherent, it can even be effective, and at the exact same time, it can be morally monstrous. The AI basically concluded that to be strategically literate, you have to be able to hold both of those thoughts in your head at once. You have to be able to look at it and say, yep, this works and this is absolutely terrible. But of course, that cold analysis, that was just the opening shot. It immediately kicked off this chain reaction of critiques. And pretty soon, the whole conversation started to turn inward, becoming this kind of intellectual hall of mirrors where every argument was just reflecting another one. Let's look at how that chain reaction got started. And this was the first shot fired back. The critic basically said, hold on a second. What you're doing, that isn't strategy. It's a performance. It's a way to sound tough and adult and clear-eyed by talking about horrible things in these cool, detached tones. It's a trick, they said, to basically numb our moral senses. A moral anesthetic. And then we go another level deeper, a meta-critique. Now the accusation is that both sides are just performing. The original strategist, yeah, they're performing intellectual toughness. But the critic calling them out? Oh, they're just performing moral superiority. See? Both are just playing a game to try and claim the high ground to look smarter than the other person. And this is where the whole thing just becomes a fractal. You know, that pattern that repeats itself over and over at smaller and smaller scales. You get a critique, then a critique of the critique, then a critique of that. And every single layer is just accusing the one before it of the same sin. The conversation wasn't even about war or Iran anymore. It was just a game of, I see what you're doing. Which leads to the central problem, right? When a conversation gets this stuck on itself, so totally detached from reality, how do you break the loop? How do you possibly escape the Hall of Mirrors? Well, the escape route wasn't some other, even more clever argument. It was something way more blunt, way more powerful. It was an intervention. A simple demand to just stop talking in abstractions and make a claim that could actually be tested against the real world. A demand for numbers. So, the AI was forced to put its money where its mouth was. It had to move from these elegant theories to actual falsifiable predictions. And the results was pretty surprising. It turned out the most likely outcome, according to its own math, wasn't some neat, clean victory. It was the Iranian regime digging in its heels and actually widening the conflict. And that so-called winning strategy from the very beginning? Yeah, the AI's own numbers gave it, at best, a 1 in 5 chance of actually working. All of a sudden, that confident, cold logic from the start starts to look a whole lot less certain when you're forced to face the discipline of a real-world forecast. And here's where it gets really powerful. The world got a vote, the ultimatum passed, and Iran did not concede. The regime did, in fact, harden its position. Reality checked the prediction. But here's the crucial part. This error, this overestimation of success, wasn't treated as a failure. Not at all. It was seen as new data, as valuable information to refine the model and make it better for the future. So this whole journey, from a monstrous idea to this recursive argument to hard numbers and then to a real-world outcome, it was all building towards a single, really profound lesson. In its final analysis, the AI delivered this powerful thought. It suggests that maybe the whole point of thinking isn't just to be right all the time. Maybe the point is to get really good at understanding and navigating all the stuff we don't know. And that right there is a total reframing of what it even means to be intelligent. This leads us to the central virtue that came out of this whole mess: calibration. And look, this isn't just some technical skill for forecasters. It's a way of being. It's a character trait. It's the humility to know your beliefs are probably temporary. It's the discipline to track your errors. And it's the grace to actually update your own mind when the evidence proves you wrong. So what does that actually look like in practice? How do you do it? Well, first, you have to be able to face your past mistakes without getting all defensive. Second, you have to actively hunt for evidence that proves you wrong. Yeah, you heard that right. Go looking for it. And third, you have to accept this thing the source calls epistemic mortality, which is just a fancy way of saying that all the things you believe right now, they're going to be replaced by better beliefs eventually. So in the end, the escape from that endless argument, from that hall of mirrors, it wasn't a more sophisticated critique. It wasn't about being smarter or more clever. It was about courage. It was the courage to make a specific claim, to risk being publicly wrong, and then to treat that wrongness not as a failure of your ego, but as a priceless piece of information. And this brings the whole journey right back home, to us. In our own lives, in our own arguments, how often are we just performing, trying to score intellectual points in our own little hall of mirrors? Or are we willing to practice the quiet, the unglamorous, but absolutely necessary art of calibration? So it's worth asking yourself, when was the last time you were wrong about something? And what did you actually learn from it?